Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to kick us off because it is 12:30. I can see people are still coming in, but we'll get on with the introduction while people are coming into the room. My name is Katie Jacobs from the CIPD, and I'm delighted to welcome you back to the CIPD Coronavirus webinar series. So we took a bit of a break over the summer. We didn't do any webinars, but apparently COVID-19 is still happening and it is still impacting the world of work in quite dramatic ways. So we're back with a new series of content. In today's webinar, we're covering a really important topic: how people professionals can build inclusivity into emerging hybrid working models. Now, obviously the government guidance has just changed and we are being told to work from home if we can. But we know that when we are allowed back into offices, most organisations are planning to take a more blended approach to office and based working. So our panel is going to be exploring what this means for inclusivity, what the opportunities are and what the risks are. Now, we hope that's going to enable you to start planning for the new world of work now and to ensure that it works for everyone when we are allowed back to some semblance of normality. On the panel, we're joined by Claire McCartney. Claire is Senior Policy Advisor, Resourcing and Inclusion at the CIPD. We've also got Claire Campbell, Programme Director at Timewise, the Flexible Working Consultancy, and Hannah Turner, Returners Programme Lead at Jacobs. Really sorry that Sarah Guerra from KCL can't join us. At last minute, she had a family emergency and had to pull out. So I'm sorry that she can't be with us this afternoon, but we've got a stellar panel and hopefully we'll still be able to answer a lot of questions and give you a lot of great content. So thanks Hannah and the Claires for joining us this afternoon. As ever, I'm just going to go through some very quick housekeeping. The session is being recorded and you will be able to access it afterwards. We should have it online by tomorrow, and the slides will also be available to download after the session. To submit questions, and please do, we love to answer your questions and that's why we're here. Can you use the Q&A tab that you can see at the bottom of your screen? Use that to ask questions that you want to direct to the panel, but feel free to use the chat function if you want to make any general comments or connect with each other. Remember that the CIPD Coronavirus Hub is there as a resource and we are adding things to it all the time. And I want to flag our wellbeing helpline for members in the UK and Ireland. With award-winning workplace wellbeing provider, Health Assured, we are now providing CIPD members with free help and support via sessions with qualified therapists that can be accessed online or over the phone. So we know this has been a really tough 6 months for people, and probably the next 6 months are going to be equally challenging. So please do remember that help is there for you if you need it. So hybrid working. While many of us might be at home for the next 6 months, beyond that, many HR leaders and people professionals will be taking a more blended approach, expecting a mixture of office and home working. While this is potentially really great for work-life balance and for modernising our ways of working, it does present challenges in terms of inclusion that people professionals need to be alert to. That could be from making sure that opportunities aren't just given to those present in the office, to making sure that those at home aren't excluded from spontaneous but business critical conversations. We're going to explore how people professionals can fairly and inclusively facilitate hybrid working. We're going to be drawing on experience around supporting part-time workers and working parents and carers to offer advice on how you can build inclusivity deep into our new models of work. And how we're going to run it is we have presentations from Claire and Claire, and then Hannah's going to join for a panel discussion to give a practitioner perspective and to answer your questions. So please do submit your questions throughout, and I'll pick up as many as I can in the discussion. So that is it from me for now. I'm going to hand over to Claire McCartney to kick us off.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Katie. It's really great to be part of this webinar today on such an important area. In my session today, I'm going to give an overview of the CIPD's wider work on flexible working, as well as some of our latest research findings and pointers around inclusive hybrid working. So, can't see the presentation slides. Are they up?
They are up. You have to say next slide, please.
Ah, okay. I can't actually see my slides, but I'm just going to say next slide anyway. Okay, so if we can go into the slide, I'm going to start to talk about the CIPD's position around flexible working. So with its many benefits, we believe that flexible working should be the norm. It shouldn't be the exception for UK workers, and that's for all UK workers, regardless of reason for wanting flexibility. And we think that flexible working is central to the creation of inclusive and productive workplaces. And actually, in the context of the global pandemic that we're experiencing, and sadly, as Katie said, you know, this is not something that is going away. Actually, flexible working, I think, becomes more important, more relevant than ever for both employers and policymakers, and actually something that can really support inclusion as well. So if we move on, I'm going to say a little bit about our wider work on flexible working. And so we've been really active actually around flexible working in a number of different ways. So we've been co-chairing the government's flexible working task force, which is a partnership across government departments, business groups, trade unions and charities to help bring about change and increase the uptake of flexible working. Peter Cheese from the CIPD has been co-chairing that with BEIS officials and Timewise, certainly been involved in that. There have been a number of different kind of campaigns associated with that. We brought forward the business case around flexible working to make that really clear to organisations, and also we've been encouraging organisations to use the tagline, happy to talk flexible working, in their recruitment as well, to try to get that flexibility right from the start of an organisation. We've also been rolling out our mentoring programme, our Steps Ahead mentoring to job seekers that find it hard to access the labour market because of the lack of flexible working, with particular emphasis around parent returners. We have a parent returner programme in carers as well. And we've also produced lots of research and evidence and practical toolkits in the area of flexible working. We conducted some cross-sector work, which really looked at some of the sectors that perhaps might find accommodating flexible working most challenging. And we saw that actually there were real opportunities there. And we also have new research where we are exploring the impact of the pandemic and home working and other opportunities potentially that can come through with regards to flexible working. So if we move on to the next slide, I'm just going to say a little bit about some of our insights around our flexible working research, because as Katie said, it's clear that the pandemic and the current climate have impacted on flexible working and inclusion in both positive but also negative ways. So first of all, the number of staff working from home in the future is expected to double in comparison to pre-pandemic levels. That's our CIPD employer research. And while we've seen one of the biggest home working experiments in the UK, as we know, that's not going to disappear, as we know from the announcements. I think what we've seen is that this has opened up mindsets about the possibility of home working. And our research also shows that productivity levels on the whole have remained constant or improved, and home workers have benefited from greater work-life balance, fewer distractions, even greater collaboration and IT upskilling, which is always helpful. Yet, this is not home working in normal times. This is enforced home working and also full-time home working as well. And many people clearly have been dealing with lots of additional pressures and anxieties relating to the pandemic. You know, we know some will have sadly experienced bereavement, and we've released guidance around how you can properly support people who've experienced bereavement. Others will be juggling work with caring responsibilities. Others will have inadequate working from home provisions, and you know, some people might actually not feel safe working from home either. And we have new guidance that we're releasing with the Equality and Human Rights Commission just next week around supporting employees that are experiencing domestic abuse. And I think, you know, it's also worth flagging that just because people are working from home, this doesn't really mean necessarily that they're working flexibly. They might still have a rigidity in the hours that they're working, and we know that often people working from home can work longer hours as the boundaries between work and home become blurred. So that's why it's really important to put a central focus on employee health and well-being, and also mental health as well, and make sure that line managers are regularly talking to employees about any health concerns. So the second point, as Katie said, what we're here to talk about is that more employers are likely to adopt this hybrid mixture of home and workplace working in the future. And, this is potentially positive. It can support greater flexibility and work-life balance. And our employee research suggests that, there is certainly a demand for this type of blended working. And we've also just recently released a review of the home working evidence, which suggests that partial, not full-time, and voluntary home working can actually really help to create good quality jobs. But what we really need to do is to avoid creating this two-tiered workforce, those that are present and visible in the office, and those by choice or actually by necessity are still at home or working remotely. And I think there are a number of factors that will impact upon this. Although children have returned to school for now, and let's hope that continues. Pre and after school childcare, as well as holiday cover, is likely to continue to be challenging. We know sadly that the number of people caring for someone older, someone disabled or seriously ill, and unable to care for themselves has increased during the pandemic, and actually the challenges of those types of caring responsibilities have become more acute. And we also know, if we think about other protected characteristics such as age, ethnic background, those with a disability or long-term health condition, this is going to have a big impact on how comfortable people feel in the longer term to return to the physical workspace. So these are all important considerations. And then how about those people that aren't able to work from home at all? So our employer research suggests that just a third of employers are planning to introduce new forms of flexible working or increase existing uptake once the lockdown restrictions end. So we really want to encourage employers to do more in this space, to increase the range and uptake of other forms of flexible working, and support a wider shift to create flexible working cultures. And finally, there's also another inclusion risk, as the gap is set to grow between those that are able to work from home and other employees who have to go to that physical workspace and have actually probably quite little flexibility. And often it's our essential workers or indeed some of the lower paid frontline staff who aren't able to work from home. And it's crucial that these workers aren't left behind when we think about flexible working. So if we move on to the next slide, I think that really underlines the reasons why we at the CIPD are calling on the government to make the right to request flexible working a day one right for all employees. Currently, that's a right if you've been employed for at least 26 weeks, but we'd like to see that become a day one right. We think that would support the uptake of a much wider range of flexible working options, certainly beyond home working. So if we move on now, I'm going to just say a little bit about some of our tips around managing inclusive hybrid working. So first of all, I think it's important to ask employees now how they'd like to work, to make sure that we're being planful and prepared. If you're able to offer this type of blended or hybrid working, it's really important to get a sense of employee preferences, how you might accommodate these, what are the implications for your workspace, what space is required, what will it be used for, collaborative team working perhaps when we're allowed back into our workspaces, deeper thinking work, back at home or remotely. And it's also really important to design your working practices to suit all of your locations. As we said, home working, remote working, it's not something that's going to be going away. So think about designing processes that support both home workers and conventionally sighted employees, concentrating particularly on things that are really important, like knowledge sharing, coordination of work, task-related communications and team relationships, to really encourage performance and innovation. Line managers are pivotal, and I'm sure we'll talk much more about this in the discussion, but training and supporting your line managers to manage inclusively. And I think this is really around the principles of good people management. So, holding regular one-to-one catch-ups to discuss any work or any personal concerns, setting clear objectives, and managing by outputs rather than inputs, reviewing whether working practices are going well for both the individual and team, putting that spotlight on mental health and physical health, well-being, really important. Ensure voice as well for all in hybrid meetings and different team practices. And I think it's also really important to role model flexible working as well, to show that flexible working is possible, at all levels within organisations. It's really important to keep a spotlight on development and career progression for all. So making sure that ongoing access is there, wherever you're based, whether you're remote, home working, whether you're part-time, full-time. Encouraging that professional development, recording any training and development sessions so that people that are working flexibly or different hours can make sure that they don't miss out on that as well. And then the final point is around building cultures of flexibility for the longer term. So if we just move on, just to say a little bit about this, I think it's really important to set your strategy and be very clear about this at the top of the organisation around flexible working, and then making sure that you're communicating that clearly, dispelling any myths that people might associate around flexible working, and I think there are plenty. The second point is really around, making sure that your line managers are really engaged with this agenda. Some examples from our research where organisations have actually got their line managers to lead on some of the flexible working pilots they've introduced, and actually they've been their biggest and their best advocates for flexible working. We talked about spotlight on career development, and I think that's really important, but also in terms of job design as well. So often, what can happen is if people decide to work flexibly or indeed reduce their hours, sometimes what happens is full-time hours are squeezed into part-time hours, and actually that's not sustainable. So it's really important to think about job design, to think about kind of smart delegation, and making that role successful from the start. And then also really important to make use of pilots, and we've said about the kind of the biggest home working pilot that we've been experiencing, but lots of organisations make use of pilots when they are trialling different types of flexible working, creative flexible working approaches. They put KPIs in and after to measure kind of their success, and they'll review based on that feedback. So I think that pilots can be really helpful in bringing about more kind of change for the longer term. So just to move forward to the last slide, which is just really to finish off and flag some of the resources that we have around flexible working, and our toolkit also for HR professionals if you haven't seen that already.
Thank you very much, Claire. And can I ask my colleagues that are there in the background, perhaps they can put some links in the chat to some of those resources for people. I've got a few questions coming in, and I'll come to those in the Q&A session after the other Claire's presentation. But please do get them in now. Don't do that thing where you all get them in at 1:20 and then I actually can't answer all of them. We can't get all of them answered. So I'd like to hand over to Claire Campbell from Timewise now to give a little bit more insight on how we can facilitate hybrid working.
Good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, I've been introduced. My name's another Claire. I've been with an organisation called Timewise for about 4 years now, with a long career before that in talent management, diversity, organisation development. So and my role at Timewise is leading a lot of our big projects and programmes with employers. So what I want to do today is kind of talk about many conversations we've had with employers over the past 6 months. What are we seeing? What are we learning? What good practices have we seen? What are some of the risks people are managing as people start to return to the office? And I guess pass on a few tips and tools based on that experience. So next. Thank you. So Timewise, if you haven't come across us, have been running since 2014 as a flexible working organisation. So we have a sort of mission. We're a social organisation with a mission to unlock more jobs for flexibility, because we know a lot of people, particularly in terms of career progression, suffer when employers aren't willing to create and support flexibility. So we do that through research and campaigns. We do that through work with employers directly, and that's, as I said, a lot of what I'll be drawing on today. And thirdly, we run a jobs board to make sure that those people who want flexible jobs can find them. I think what it's fair to say that Timewise is known for going into some of the sectors and jobs that are difficult to make flexibility work. So we've done research projects in areas like nursing, social care, construction, teaching. So these are jobs that are traditionally seen as hard to make flexible, but we like to think there's a way to do it, and we'll go there and try and find them out. So next slide, please. Thank you. Lockdown, it's fair to say, has changed the working landscape. I find this fascinating. Believe it or not, my psychology project in my third year at university was all around remote working back in the late 90s, and people's kind of negative perceptions towards home working back then. So it's really fascinating to see the journey we've been on around flexible and remote working since then. And I think, whatever, I know there's been lots of negatives through this period, but it really has disrupted the world of work forever. And I think it's very hard to imagine a position where we all go back to working in the way that we did 6 months ago. So this is a kind of fundamental change, the most rapid change to working practices that we've seen in my lifetime. And I think, I'm not sure, look at some of these headlines, that the government anticipated what the resistance would be to going back. When they were trying to get us to go back, July, August, very few people were returning to the office. And I think, that's a big part about people's feelings of safety. You think back to the old Maslow hierarchy of needs, people need to feel safe where they're working, and that's been a key part of it. But also it's about people seeing the benefits of having had more time at home, reinvesting that time they would have spent commuting, and just kind of the ability to get a lot of the tasks you need to get done very productively at home. So I just don't think we're going to go back to how it was before. And on the news this week, kind of encouraging us to stay home for longer is only going to kind of further entrench people and solidify people in wanting to be at home. Having said that, we are hearing some of the negatives about long-term remote working. So I'll touch on that again in a second. Next slide. Thank you. I think, as I said, because this is such a fundamental change, it is an opportunity for us HR practitioners to think how we want work to look in future, and how, as Claire said earlier, lots of people want to and find the best way to work is sometime at home, sometime in the office. It is having more control and choice about how you work your day, not assuming that 9 to 5 is the best way to work your time and your hours. And I think this is some of the things that we've learned through this period. So this, I think we've seen it, greater use of remote working in roles where we never thought people could work remotely. And that's been really fascinating to hear, law firms who thought the papers had to stay in the office have had to find workarounds. Teachers who, never thought any jobs could be done remotely have worked full-time remotely. Clinical roles in the NHS, my sister's a psychologist, a lot of the roles in the NHS have been done via Zoom and done okay. So, we've broken a bit of a myth about the use of remote working and embracing technology. And again, I don't think we'll go back. We started to break that connection between the hours someone works and what someone achieves. And I think, hopefully this will edge us more into a world where managers do focus more on outputs and outcomes of somebody's delivery, rather than the fact they can see them in the office 9 to 5, so they must have been productive. So I think, again, that's a move in the right direction, although we need to support managers with the skills to manage in that way. And lastly, this is the chance. My conversations in the last couple of weeks with employers have been, we don't want to go back to how it was before. This is our reset. And now we need to talk, help us engage our organisation in the conversation about what the future could look like and the best way for us to work collaboratively and at home, and kind of get that model right. So next slide. This just some of the examples I've seen of kind of innovation almost enforced, as on the previous slide, that necessity is the mother of invention. these are areas where we've kind of taken organisations have taken a different approach because we've been forced to, but actually it's probably a step in the right direction. So Lloyds Bank, I spoke to recently, they've opened up desks in many of their branches for people who were working at home to go and work. So those who felt very isolated at home, those who may not have a suitable office environment and so on, they've created what they're calling wellbeing desks in some of their branches where people can go and work and feel they can have connected, they can get to talk to other colleagues and so on. So a nice example of kind of using what was some empty space. And we've seen other firms again talk about creating local hubs, so places for people to get together that don't involve them schlepping into the centre of London or another city. But this kind of feeling, we can work with local hubs and local arrangements. Second picture, this is from a rail company. And the guy's job used to be walking up and down the tracks at night when the trains weren't running to try and find cracks in the line. And over this period, he's been working from home using a drone, and it's actually improved safety quite significantly because he's less tired, working at night, often on your own or in small groups, and in the dark, not great. Watching the lines during the day with a drone, actually more effective. So a nice example of kind of innovation. And the third picture there, construction. I think we're doing a big project in construction and some really interesting stories about how social distancing has changed the way they work. Firstly, there was always this sacred cow in construction that everybody had to be there at 8 o'clock for the safety briefing, and you had to be there, and that was one of the kind of pinpoints of the day. And actually, they can't crowd people into a room to have a safety briefing. Oh, you know what, we can video it. People don't need to all start at 8 o'clock. We can video the briefing, they can watch it later. And also they talk to us about making better use of machinery and technology, so not needing big teams. The fact they haven't had big teams on site has meant they've embraced other technology and tools to get the job done. So I think there's some innovation through this period we should retain, particularly in relation to technology. Next. So, but there is a downside, and the theme today is inclusivity. So, things to watch for, things to flag. Firstly, we know, we hear from many companies, this is feeling that this has extended everybody's working day. So rather than working from home, we're living in our offices, and we have to be really careful of that. So, helping people log off, helping make sure their days are still realistic is really important. And again, I think why the line manager role really matters in terms of that well-being piece for their staff. Secondly, unfortunately, there is evidence that lockdown has had a negative impact on women who have usually taken the caring responsibilities, who have suffered more of the redundancies in sectors like hospitality and retail. So we have to be really careful we're not just taking a step backwards on equality and all the improvements we've made of gender pay gap and so on over the past few years. So that's something we're really keen to see, more inclusive working, more understanding of things like parental and caring commitments in the policies that employers are creating. Thirdly, we know this could have a disproportionate impact on older or high-risk workers who don't feel safe to return to the office. So this is the importance of inclusive ways of working. And I think for the time being, assuming we need to design, anything we're designing needs to be designed with home workers in mind. And lastly, Claire talked about two-tier workplace. We also are really keen to make sure frontline jobs have consideration around flexible working and different ways of working, as well as office jobs, because otherwise it's starting to exacerbate a sort of them and us. Flexibility is just for the kind of the knowledge workers and the home workers and not for the rest, and we need to make sure there's an offer there for everybody. Okay, next. Well, this was just, again, on that point of inclusivity, making, you're aware there are particular groups who are struggling through this period. And I think interesting, I think people think automatically about parents and carers, but actually younger workers have really found this period hard, particularly those, early in their career trying to get on the job ladder or learn in a job in the first few weeks, and doing that from home, particularly when you're new to work or trying to learn a profession or a practice, is incredibly hard. So, there are some watch outs in terms of different pockets of your population and giving consideration to effective ways of working and supporting for those groups. Next. Thank you. So I wrote these slides on Monday, and obviously the world's slightly changed. I'm conscious this slide's a bit out of date now in terms of the message about getting back to the office. But over the last couple of months, the conversations we've had about return to work, there's been a range of kind of ways of people thinking about it. The first, you know, and there have been some in the press, kind of organisations going with a heavier message of, we want people back in the office. One we talked to, yeah, we've told people they have to be back in the office 2 days a week. And this probably is a reaction to the government's message of trying to get things back to normal, but it has sometimes been received negatively. So I think there's just a caution from the learning from this phase in terms of people feeling forced to go back when they don't feel safe, and that can kind of cause a strong reaction. So, you know, tip for others, just get the tone right and make sure it's done with people rather than kind of this feeling that you're forcing people back before they're ready. But then on the other hand, second company there, you know, we've already told people it'll be next summer before we even think about going back. But what they're having to do is make sure they're finding other ways for people to connect and feel still connected, because actually, you know, if you haven't seen your colleagues for a year and a half, that's a really long time in terms of feeling connected, feeling part of a team and collaborating. So they're looking at other ways to build in collaboration through tools, through, you know, allowing small groups to get together to kind of create that feeling of connection. And actually some nice examples of doing things like having you know, some thinking sessions, creative sessions. So not all our Zoom meetings need a massive agenda and to-do list. Let's create some space in our week to do some thinking and some more creative stuff that we know typically is better done with colleagues than kind of when you're stuck on your own in your own desk. And the last two there kind of talking about the future of the office, and I think we will see a big change. People are talking about the office will just be somewhere you go to collaborate. You will need a reason to go to the office in the way that last year or the year before you might have needed a reason to work from home. So, you know, we need to get better at defining which tasks are done in the office and why, and helping people, I guess, make the right decision about when and where they can work most effectively. Next. So just thinking ahead, again, kind of tips for us all as HR practitioners. I think as you're thinking about this for the longer term, it's about thinking a bit more about the activities that need to be done and where they can be done best and why. So actually, you know, people will have discovered that they can get a lot of their tasks done very effectively from home and save the commute. Why take those activities back to the office? Let's think about kind of where, you know, who needs to go in and why a bit more thoughtfully. I think really key is chatting to staff, understanding the demand, and making sure different groups have voices. So if you do have staff networks, diversity networks, parents networks, disability networks, or whatever, make sure they have a voice in what return to works looks like. And you can design, you know, processes and policies that kind of fit what you're hearing. And then think about, you know, what's your framework for the future? So what ideally would the flexibility options be for the long term, for the future, for staff, so that you can give managers then a bit of a framework. These are the options we think will work for our service, for our organisation, and give managers that to have conversations with their team. And lastly, you know, we need to reflect this in all our kind of core HR processes. So we're going to have to, you know, change the way we recruit with people wanting to work flexibly. Need to think about performance management, need to think about talent management, and so on, to make sure you know, those different ways of working are built into those. Okay. Finally, from us, again, you know, a few more useful tools. We created a couple of months ago a guide specifically for line managers to help them manage some of these conversations during lockdown and beyond. So it includes, for example, kind of the questions you should ask for a team member who's working from home to make sure you're covering the things they need to work and kind of live productively. It includes a template for a team discussion with your conversation with your team about how do we work effectively as a team when we work remotely. So there's useful things in there. And then there's a matching guide for individuals to help them think about the flexibility they need and how to have a good conversation about that in the longer term. You'll find information about some of our pioneer programs, as I said. What does flex look like in difficult to flex roles? And that's on there as well. And further information if you're writing a business case or want to kind of draw on examples and case studies. So I will leave it there. Thank you for the interesting discussion, Katie.
Thank you so much, Claire, and thanks everyone. I got loads and loads of questions coming in, so everybody really took my words to heart. Before I come to those, I want to introduce Hannah Turner, who leads the Returners program at Jacobs. So Hannah, perhaps before we get into the audience Q&A, you could tell us a little bit more about the program and how it runs, but also reflect on what we've just heard from Claire and how you think this might impact flexible or hybrid working for the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi everyone, nice to be here with you. So yeah, I work for Jacobs. I've been with them for 12 years, but I actually have a background as a traffic engineer. I did that for 10 years and then had children myself, and had mixed experience of a return to work. And so I put this idea together for a returners program, supporting our working parents before, during and after returning from leave. So rather than sort of getting people back into work who've been out for 2, 3, 4 years, actually making sure we get it right in-house, the systems are in place, with an idea to basically having an impact on our gender pay gap. And so, yeah, it's been going for about a year now, and it's been definitely insightful, and COVID has definitely ramped up some of the conversations I've been having. If there's ever a silver lining to this situation, I've been knocking on the door of flexible and kind of been that annoying child saying, but why can't we do it like this? Why can't we have flexible working? Why can't we allow someone to work here? Why would you have someone with this skill set but not based in the right location, not able to do that job? Didn't make sense. And all of a sudden, those doors opened. And so, yeah, take a positive from the situation if I can. And so here at Jacobs, you know, I think initially when we were sort of faced with this prospect of closing our offices and going virtually online almost overnight, I had visions of relationships breaking down, feelings of isolation for colleagues. And I think a lot of us were scrambling about how to manage it. And I think there was probably a couple of weeks where we didn't quite know up from down, and we fell through some pitfalls. But actually, I think whilst there are elements that we're still working on in terms of recreating, like catching up over a cuppa and those kind of experiences, but actually I think people's experiences have been quite different, and that's been from our leadership down. So I think they brought the human element. So I feel like we have authenticity right from the top, and they are honest and open with us when they have answers, when they don't. And that has been throughout, right from the beginning. They were speaking to us, you know, on a weekly basis, more than once a week, and then they've kind of constantly been talking to us about how much information do you want, how much information do you need, is it useful? So we really have been brought along with that journey, and so much so that now, as we're looking back, you know, to getting back into offices, and we were obviously planning for that, but there was no pressure for us to go back in. It's entirely based on an individual's need, and so I think, you know, the one thing I take away from this process is kind of the human side. We've become closer knit. We've tackled this unprecedented time together, and we put this focus on supporting each other and normalizing and sharing our challenges with each other, rather than sort of bringing a different self to work. You know, you might have your kids or your dog or whatever else going off in the background, and that's okay, and that's reality. So I think it's really exciting to listen to Claire and how we move into this hybrid environment. For me personally, I was working hybrid before, so I'm kind of in that unique position. Although I didn't have my kids at home before, so that was a different setup. But I was working part-time and hybrid, so 3 days a week from home, and then traveling to offices when there was a need. So I guess I'm in that unique position maybe of sort of living that a little bit, so I'm able to support some of my parent returners that I work with in terms of making that a reality for them too.
I haven't done that before, where I've been on mute. I feel I've done hundreds of these, but first time for everything. I'm going to come to audience questions, and I will try and kind of group them together and theme them, because we have had an awful lot. So I'm going to ask the first one that she came through earlier in the session. What steps would you recommend managers and senior leaders take to ensure a two-tiered workforce doesn't develop in organisation? What behaviours and actions would need to be developed to ensure inclusion? So Claire McCartney, can I ask you to weigh in on that first?
Yes, definitely. I think it's really important, as we kind of emphasise in our presentation. So I think inclusion should be at the heart of all of kind of senior leaders, managers' behaviours. They need to think to ensure that everyone gets an opportunity for voice. They need to think about the kind of the processes that they're using. You know, we've talked about the importance of career development, and we know that kind of visibility, exposure, networking can be ways of getting ahead in a job. But actually, you know, how can we use virtual platforms to facilitate that? You know, so how can we use kind of the new ways of working to create that kind of equality of opportunity for everyone. So I think that is really important. And just, you know, making sure, also thinking about, you know, any of the decisions that you've made throughout this period, just kind of assessing those as well, reviewing, looking at your data, seeing if anything's had a negative impact on people. So I think it is just having much more of an inclusive approach, thinking about voice, all of those sorts of things.
And Hannah, is there anything you've done at Jacobs, particularly around like getting line managers engaged, if perhaps they kind of are not so progressive around this kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the big thing that we've been looking at is the culture and the environment. So creating this environment right at the outset of meetings, and just generally where everyone feels confident and comfortable to share. You know, one of the things that we do here is, you know, beginning of meetings, asking everybody on a scale of 1 to 10, how are they today? Because it's very easy to say I'm fine, but what does I'm fine mean? Whereas on a scale of 1 to 10, you're then opening up opportunity to say, actually, I'm here, or I'm here. And so then it starts a dialogue, and that's actually created a team dynamic where you might have had a catch up. If you saw someone in the office not feeling too great, or maybe looking a bit down, you might go and have a chat to them. By having that dialogue, you don't have to say anything more in that meeting, but then what happens is that a team member then might get in touch with Asian Day and just check in and say, how are you doing? Are you okay? And so I think also in terms of when we're delivering stuff, I think the aim is to sort of go for this progression as opposed to perfectionism. So I fall in this trap of that. I always wanted to have something presented that was absolutely perfect. And that's something that we need to do with our line managers as well, is to make sure that actually when people are coming to them, maybe for more progressive conversations as opposed to presenting the final result.
Thank you. We've had quite a few questions about the options for embedding flexibility into roles that aren't office-based, and how you don't kind of create that opposite two-tier workforce that we talked about, where people who have to go into a site resent those who are able to work from home. Claire, Campbell, can you offer any thoughts on kind of embedding flexibility on roles that you can't just say, well, you just work from home then?
Yeah, I mean, I think the heart of this one is kind of making a commitment to expand flexible working options for everyone. So making sure in those frontline roles, okay, they can't work from home, but are there other types of flexibility that you could offer? Could you offer a choice of shifts? Can you offer, you know, compressed hours? Can you offer, we've had a lot, one thing we've trialed a lot is team-based rostering. So actually they take over the, you know, the choice of shifts and when they're going to be working, and you hand that responsibility to the team. So for me, it is, yeah, helping people understand flex doesn't look the same for everybody. You know, the options for how you work can't apply to everyone. And people understand, you know, I'm a nurse, I sort of have to go to the ward, I can't do that from home. But if you can give me empowerment in other ways to have choice and control about how I'm working, then that gives me the same feeling that you're valuing me and my ways of working.
Yeah, and Claire McCartney, anything to add on that, or if there are any kind of feelings of resentment or unfairness within the workforce, how you deal with that as a people professional?
Yeah, I think it's probably about, you know, I think we need to make sure that we have good training for line managers. You know, there's going to be a rise in requests around flexible working. I don't think that's a bad thing, you know, because we're kind of creating this culture where there are more opportunities. But I think you need to have some really good training for line managers, consistency, kind of some guiding principles that they can apply so that there is consistency and fairness when they're doing that. And I just concur with Claire's views as well, you know, from the cross-sector work that we've done, and we looked at, you know, manufacturing, we looked at retail, loads of different sectors where you'd think actually it may be challenging to accommodate flexible working, and we found that actually, you know, there were opportunities to embed flexibility in there. They didn't look the same, you know, for everyone, but there was an opportunity for flexibility, and actually that made a big difference to the company, you know, in terms of the hours that they could operate. So there was a win-win there, but also for the individuals as well. So I think it's thinking much more broadly about the opportunities for everyone.
Thank you. I see there's a question that came in about facilitating inclusive and good meetings when you have a mix of people in the physical space and some people dialing in remotely. How do you ensure that equality and inclusivity you get more naturally when everyone is in the same space or everyone is joining remotely? And I can see on the chat there's a really lively discussion and people are sharing lots of things on that. But Hannah, have you got any thoughts on making that work?
Do you know what? It's not something I've experienced myself yet. I think if you think back to pre-COVID days, I had was that person dialing in for remote and sort of sitting in the background waiting to put my hand up to say. But I think actually, you know, as we move forward and we're learning ever in this situation, I think it'll be a completely different setup when we get back into it. And I think the video element, as much as I felt a bit of video fatigue probably towards the beginning of this experience, I've learned to manage my diary in a way where I'm not on video for 8 hours a day or whatever back to back. But actually the video element has become the norm for us anyway at Jacobs. I think there's a sort of, you don't have to share, but when you are able to, it makes a big difference in terms of feeling present and being part of it. And I think there's some discussions around whether you, rather than having the screen up with the slides and that one person or 2 people's faces who aren't in the room, whether you all have that person on your laptop as well. So you're kind of you're talking to them rather than being a separate entity. But I think we've got more to learn definitely on that.
And some of the stuff that's coming through on the chat is about the importance of having a really good chair who encourages everybody to contribute and makes sure that everybody gets to have their say. I've been speaking to a lot of HR leaders about this. We're kind of wrestling with, do you impose a rule where if one person dials in, then everybody has to dial in? But there's also, I think, some interesting technology that's coming on the market. There's a camera called the OWL, which creates kind of more immersive environment. I think organisations potentially might need to invest in things that mean that if you are not in the room, you feel more included, rather than that, like you say, Hannah, that person is just kind of, oh, don't forget about me, I am here. Exactly. We have got an employment lawyer on the line, which I am aware of, but we have had a few questions about in how you frame employment contracts, hybrid working, and whether it needs to be something that is in a contract or whether it works more effectively on a more informal basis. Claire Campbell, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, again, probably not an employment lawyer to put my hands up. I think where someone's switching their permanent base to be home or their main base to be home, you do have to make that contractual, and there are certain you know, obligations, tax and otherwise, to be aware of someone's base is home rather than in an office. But occasional home working, but I mean probably up to a couple of days a week, is fine within normal contract. So yeah, it's in the past it's usually depended how much someone was working from home and whether that becomes seen as their base or not, that's kind of triggered whether it needed to be in contracts. But I have seen some updated wording around this as a result of the fact everybody's sort of temporarily working from home. So at the moment, yeah, the government's not requiring us to change contracts because it's seen still as temporary kind of working from home driven by conditions. But yeah, if you were closing an office and asking people to work from home, you would need to make a contractual change.
And Claire McCartney, I know you're not a lawyer either, but would you foresee it more people changing their contracts, or do you think it can be done, especially if we talk about this blended approach, more informally based on trust?
I think it can be done more informally, and also, you know, we are in a transition phase that, you know, as we know at the moment with the new government guidance, you know, that could go on for another 6 months. So I don't think that we necessarily know kind of exactly where we're heading. So I think it's probably prudent to say that any changes at the moment are temporary, and also to give organisations the ability to learn and apply lessons learned. So I think that would be my view.
Thank you. I've had a few questions about, I think something you mentioned, Claire Campbell, in your presentation about the day becoming very, very long and us all living at work rather than working at home. Hannah, any thoughts on encouraging people to switch off if they're really overdoing it with the home working?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is when the line manager role and that kind of culture piece and the environment that you're setting makes a really, really important difference. For example, on Tuesday of this week, I knew it was going to be the last day of sunshine. So I took myself off for a dog walk first thing in the morning and didn't log on until 10, but felt no pressure, no, you know, pre-COVID, would I have done that? Possibly not, but it felt pressure to be online when everyone else is online. So I think it's really about creating that environment where people can take the time, take the breath, step away. I mean, we've ramped up a lot of support around well-being and mental health. We have positive mental health champions for people to reach out to talk to. We run some meditation sessions once a week that anyone can dial into to access that. And we have a lot of our leadership talking about how they manage their day and get that switch off, close off time, depending on what the setup is at home. So yeah, there's lots of things I think that you can do, but I think it's actually being quite strict with yourself and making yourself do it rather than falling back into old habits maybe.
Thanks. And Claire Campbell, somebody specifically asked to you on the kind of same topic, how do you think presenteeism has changed while working from home?
I think for what we hear is managers being surprised that people almost have been surprised by the fact that people have worked productively, have put in the hours. So, you know, for the vast majority of people, they've got their work done despite, you know, even if they've got the kids at home or extra caring responsibilities or whatever. So I think, you know, by and large, this has been positive. I've still heard the odd negative story of, you know, managers wanting to watch that people have logged in the morning. And I've been asked that question, you know, should I be checking that they're actually at their desk or whatever? And we always say, no, it's got to be about building trust. So, you know, and there are a couple of questions here around the performance management bit. I think, you know, we encourage managers to spend longer in one-to-ones, helping define what the outcome, you know, the kind of end result of what you're trying to achieve is. So if you spend, rather than kind of, if you're in the office, you might check in every now and then, you know, during a task, spend longer at the beginning, agreeing what the outcome, you know, the end result looks like, discuss as a coach to them how they're going to get there, and the steps they could take, and then just sort of keep in touch, but give them the freedom of when they're going to work, how they're going to do the task. So I think, you know, moving managers towards that style of kind of be really clear on what you need, when, what the parameters are, but then just be there as a coach, as a supporter, unblocker of problems, you know, take that slightly different management style. And again, that really suits the fact you're not sitting next to them in the office to be able to answer regular questions and so on.
Thank you. Got a few questions about kind of cultural aspects and the keeping social connectivity, and specifically also how you can create that water cooler kind of conversation or that informal chat. Claire McCartney, any thoughts on maintaining that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think the kind of the virtual coffee breaks can be really helpful, because it just, you know, gives people the opportunity to connect, not necessarily just about work issues as well. And I think we need that more than ever, kind of on personal issues. So I think, you know, they can be really helpful. I think we have to be a bit careful around the kind of the forced fun element. So, you know, some teams might be doing quizzes and things like that, but other people might not enjoy that. So I think you know, everything has to be voluntary, but, you know, opportunities in the day to have a kind of live chat, live Q&A, you know, with your kind of head of your department, or indeed just with your colleagues. I think just building in different mechanisms, and then people can choose what works for them, because, you know, we all work in very different ways and we need different things. So, you know, as long as we've got different channels there, then hopefully that sort of water cooler conversations, that sort of creativity and innovation will still happen.
And Hannah, is there anything you've done kind of practically at Jacobs to maintain that?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned we have that kind of the meditation, we have coffee breaks, etc. And I think key to it all is just creating that two-way communication piece. I think, like, I agree with what Claire Campbell said there about leaving people to their own devices, but making sure they know that they can come and ask for questions, and that it's okay to come and offload about something, or those things that you do naturally when you're in the office together. I think you need to be a bit more purposeful about building that into your working week or your working month. Build that time in, don't just cram it with meetings and work, and, you know, you need to build that kind of natural pace. And I think as someone who's worked part-time now for 5 years, that was a big change for me when I started working part-time. So I think I've started on that journey. So it's about just, yeah, giving yourself a break a little bit and being a bit kinder to yourself, and recognizing in yourself when you're getting to that burnout point, or when you need to connect with other people, and just doing it.
Thank you. Claire Campbell, somebody's put quite a big question about out of sight, out of mind. How do you stop this pandemic putting equal pay and equality back as an indirect result of typically females taking on the flexible or home-based role? I think that's something you touched on a bit in your presentation, but perhaps any thoughts on what Timewise is thinking about that? It's one I've been definitely grappling with, you know, just from my own personal experience, personal network, you know, seeing that it's generally the women who've been picking up the extra childcare and having to reduce hours or shift how they work to kind of take over the homeschooling and so on. So I think it's absolutely happening. I think it's an important thing to be aware of in the weeks and months ahead. I mean, on the other hand, the fact that more companies now have got comfortable with home working and remote working is actually helping,
because you know what we ultimately want is a world where, you know, it doesn't matter why you need flexible working, it's just an accepted practice. We know it benefits many people, and many people will want to do it, and it will be for everyone, rather than, you know, we reverse back a few years, it was for a minority generally of women who would ask for flexible working. So I'm hoping the general move is a positive one, as in, and I would encourage employers to be talking for everyone in whatever kind of policies and practices they're putting out. These are not just for the parents or just for the carers, you know, make it very inclusive in the way that you're offering and describing things in the months ahead. And as I said, in the long term, I think that will benefit the women. But in the short term, yeah, I welcome, you know, people have been calling for things like, you know, making sure when we're recruiting, you know, we're tracking more closely than ever that we're offering jobs, you know, to a broad demographic, particularly when the employment market's going to be tough, and we know women have been disadvantaged through the job losses in certain sectors so far. So yeah, it is, big alarm bells are ringing, but I hope, as I said, in the long term, the move towards greater flexible working will benefit women.
Okay, McCartney, do you agree with that?
Yes, I mean, I do. I mean, obviously, we talked about various studies which shows that it's had more of a negative impact upon women and working mothers, particularly. So I think it's something that organisations, you know, need to carefully look at. You know, we've also seen gender pay gap reporting, you know, taken off this year as mandatory. But I'd encourage organisations to, you know, to carry on with their reporting as much as possible, to carry on looking at their data, you know, to making sure that all of the decisions that they are making are fair, you know, follow the EHRC guidelines around that, because they've got really great practical guidance. And then also the Government Equalities Office and the Behavioural Insights team, you know, put together some really good evidence around what works in terms of promoting gender equality. So I'd really encourage organisations to look at that as well, because, you know, we know that women have been more negatively impacted. And as Claire said, that would look, you know, that would go right from kind of recruitment and promotion decisions, you know, clarity around pay salary ranges as well in terms of negotiation, you know, broader diversity. So lots of different considerations that start to really hone in on some of those practices that make a difference.
Yeah, I'm afraid we're almost out of time. I'm going to ask one more question, because we've had quite a few on the same topic, which is the cost implications of setting people up to work from home. What have you seen companies do? Particularly if somebody's used a particular example where their board is open to hybrid working, but the cost of having a work and a home workstation which meets health and safety requirements is proving to be a barrier. So Claire, Campbell, any advice on what you've seen businesses do to set people up to work safely at home?
Really varies from, you know, kind of just sending out a one-page bit of advice on health and safety, but kind of trusting people, particularly if it's a short-term arrangement, to kind of set up a desk and a chair that's safe at home, through to those that are making sure managers have access to a fund to pay for people who need desktops, chairs, and other equipment at home. So, you know, and it's going to depend a bit what your budget is as to which of those options you can take. But I think as now we're looking at this for an extended period, and it's hard to see people going back, I think, you know, certainly people will need laptops and computers to make sure that they can work remotely effectively, and I'd expect in companies to be those. And there is an HMRC thing, I hate to quote on tax and things, but there is a sort of an allowance that you can, for people working from home, that you can draw down through HMRC. So Claire, you're nodding. If you know anything about that, please add to it. But no, I can't remember. It's something like £24 a month or something that you're entitled to if you do work from home, through a tax scheme through HMRC. So for smaller businesses and self-employed people, that's something that they can access.
Yeah, no, I think the onus is more on the individuals to be able to apply for that, as far as I know. But yeah.
Can I just add something there as well? I think we're talking about a hybrid scenario. I don't think there's a need necessary for me to have an office at home, a desk here, and a desk in the office. Actually, you know, maybe there's some calculations or some work that can be done to understand how many desks you actually need to have in an office if you've got people working in this hybrid scenario, because it won't be that everyone's in and everyone's out. It's about managing that a little bit. So maybe it's not quite as clean cut as having a replica.
Thank you. That's a really good point. And I can just share on that some insights I've got from some of my group sessions I've been running with CPOs. The most average number that gets quoted that people have given is a £250 allowance to set yourself up at home. And some organisations have kind of produced a catalogue, so they've worked with their procurement functions to say to people, here is what you are kind of allowed to buy. We want to set you up, but please don't go crazy. You can buy from this catalogue, and this is a kind of list of things. So kind of HR working with procurement and facilities to get people set up at home. But Hannah's point is a good one. If we're talking long-term future, perhaps we don't need quite as amazing home setup as we're going into the office for half the time. I'm afraid I'm going to have to draw it to a close there. I'm really sorry that I didn't get to ask more questions, but I just want to flag that we are doing a webinar on the 6th of October, which is going to be looking at home working for the longer term. So I will save some of those questions and we will pull them across to that webinar, because I think some of them were kind of much more specific around this longer term home working. But just like to thank Claire and Hannah. Thank you so much for giving up your time this afternoon to share your insights with us. Remind everybody who's watching that you will be able to access this webinar on demand, and you'll also be able to download the slides. Apologies again that Sarah wasn't able to join us. She had a family emergency. Also like to just flag that wellbeing helpline that I mentioned again. You can see details about it on your screen right now. But that is it from us for now. Thank you so much for watching and have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.